He thought he was humiliating a nobody. But when the milkshake dripped from the man's face, the billionaire saw something he'd never seen before: calm power, quiet pain, and eyes that had seen war. The morning light spilled over the city like liquid fire, streaking across glass towers and settling over the most exclusive restaurant in town, the Vellum. Inside, Alexander Vale sat alone by the corner window, his reflection blending with the skyline he believed he owned. He stirred his coffee without tasting it. Black, no sugar, always black. He said milk was for people who still believed in sweetness. The restaurant whispered with money, the hush of velvet, the clink of fine glassware, the perfume of wealth. And yet, even surrounded by all he'd built, Alexander felt nothing. He'd long forgotten what joy tasted like. "Mr. Vale." The hostess approached carefully, her voice thin and cautious. "Your 10 o'clock investors." He didn't look up. "Cancel it." "Sir." "Cancel everything. I don't meet with men who lie before lunch." She nodded, retreating as if from a wild animal. Alexander lifted his eyes briefly and caught his reflection in the window. A man carved from stone, successful, admired, utterly untouchable. But the truth was darker. Behind the armor of his arrogance, there was a hollow place no money could fill. Somewhere deep in his suit pocket was a folded photograph, edges worn, image faded. A woman's smile, a boy's small hand on his shoulder. He never looked at it anymore. He just kept it there, like punishment. Across town, a man in a gray hoodie stood at a bus stop, holding a crumpled job application. Caleb Dean looked like any other worker looking for a second chance. No one would guess the calm, quiet man was a former Navy SEAL who had once led men through chaos and fired. He'd returned home a hero, but the world had moved on without him. The medals didn't pay bills. The discipline didn't stop the nightmares. What he had left were instincts, the ability to see danger, to read people, to disappear. And that's exactly what he planned to do. Caleb stared at the sign that read the Vellum, staff entrance. His friend at the Veterans Bureau had mentioned the billionaire who owned the place, Alexander Vale. The name alone carried the kind of weight that made good people bow and bad people worst. He wasn't there for the pay. He was there to see what kind of man Alexander Vale really was. Some called him ruthless. Others called him broken. Caleb wanted to find out which one was true. He pushed through the back door and stepped into a world that smelled of sweat, garlic, and ambition. "Hey, new guy." A line cook shouted. "Apron's on the hook. Don't talk, just move." Caleb nodded, tying the apron neatly, movements sharp and practiced. "What's your name?" Someone asked. "Caleb." "Last name?" He gave a faint smile. "Doesn't matter." The sous chef snorted. "Good. We don't do last names here. Just survival." Caleb blended in quickly, his body remembering the rhythm of discipline. He wiped down tables, carried trays, polished glassware until it gleamed. His eyes noticed everything. The nervous glances, the strained smiles, the way the manager stiffened whenever Alexander's name was mentioned. Power ran through this place like static. Fear was the current. Upstairs, Alexander watched it all through the glass railing. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't even interested. But the sight of his staff moving like ants below, desperate to please, afraid to fail, gave him a strange satisfaction. And then, he saw him dot a new face. Calm posture, controlled movements. There was something about the man that didn't fit the usual mold of servitude. He carried himself with quiet confidence, the kind of confidence Alexander didn't like in people beneath him. "Who's that?" he asked the maitre d'. "New hire, sir. Started this morning. Seems efficient." Alexander's gaze lingered. "Efficient? Let's see how fast he runs." He leaned back in his chair, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Tell him to bring me a vanilla milkshake." The maitre d' hesitated, just a flicker of moral hesitation. "Of course, sir." Caleb received the order without expression. A milkshake for a man like that. It was almost ironic. He blended it silently, poured it into a tall glass, and walked it over to the billionaire's table. Alexander's table was a world of crystal and silence. When Caleb approached, the billionaire didn't even look at him at first. He simply tapped his fingers against the marble, each sound deliberate. Caleb set the milkshake in front of him. "Your orders, sir." Alexander finally looked up. His voice was smooth, sharp. "Tell me, Caleb, do you enjoy working here?" Caleb's answer came calm, measured. "I'm grateful for the opportunity. Alexander's smirk deepened. Grateful. That's an interesting word. Usually means someone's desperate. The words hung in the air like smoke. Caleb didn't move. Didn't blink. His stillness was disarming. The kind that came from years of being trained not to react. Alexander's eyes narrowed. He was used to fear, to submission. But this man looked through him. Something inside Alexander stirred. Something he didn't like that he reached for the milkshake, twirling the straw between his fingers. You should always remember, he said softly, almost playfully, that gratitude doesn't make you equal. It just means you know your place. Caleb said nothing. His silence pressed harder than any words could. Alexander leaned back, watching him. For a second, he thought about letting it go. But then that still, unbroken calm in Caleb's eyes ignited something darker. Pride. Ego. The need to remind the world who he was. He lifted the glass slightly, letting the condensation drip onto his hand. And then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. The restaurant hummed with quiet elegance, the low murmur of conversation, the faint clinking of silver against china, and somewhere in the background, a violin weeping softly. Alexander Vale sat in his throne-like chair at the corner of the room, the world neatly arranged around him. To the guests, he looked powerful. To his employees, untouchable. But to himself, he felt nothing at all. That he watched Caleb approach again. The new staff member, calm and composed, carrying himself with the stillness of someone who'd learned control the hard way. That calmness irritated him. It was too steady, too silent. Alexander didn't understand why it got under his skin, but it did. Every step Caleb took felt like an unspoken challenge, as if the man's dignity, quiet and unbothered, was mocking the billionaire's chaos. The milkshake sat in Alexander's hand, cold, thick, innocent. But in his mind, it was something else, a weapon, a test. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a smirk that had ruined lives before breakfast. Tell me, Caleb, he said softly, voice slicing through the hum of the room. Do you enjoy serving people? Caleb's eyes met his, unwavering, calm. I enjoy doing my job well, sir. That's not what I asked, Alexander replied, tilting the glass slightly, the milkshake sliding toward the rim. Do you enjoy serving? A pause. Long enough for the nearby tables to notice. Long enough for the violinist to slow the tempo. Caleb's voice was even. I believe service isn't weakness. It's discipline. For a second, Alexander almost respected the answer. Almost. Then the darkness won, without warning. He tipped the glass forward. The milkshake spilled in a slow, almost cinematic arc, cold and heavy, splattering across Caleb's face and shoulders. The sound was sharp, final, a wet slap of humiliation that silenced the entire restaurant. Gasps rose from the tables. Someone whispered, "Did he just?" Even the violin stopped mid-note. Caleb stood perfectly still, milk dripping from his chin onto his apron, his skin shimmering under the soft golden lights. He blinked once, just once, and set the serving tray down carefully. Alexander leaned forward, voice low, almost satisfied. Next time, be faster. Every eye in the restaurant burned on them. Pity, shock, disgust. But Caleb didn't give them the reaction they wanted. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't even flinch. He picked up a white napkin, wiped his face with slow precision, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table in front of Alexander. Anything else, sir? The billionaire froze. The arrogance on his face faltered. For the first time in years, he felt. Small. Caleb's voice carried no anger, no tremor, just quiet strength, the kind that comes from a man who's already seen worse, survived worse, been worse. When Caleb turned to walk away, every sound in the room returned, a spoon clinking, a chair scraping, someone clearing their throat. But Alexander heard none of it. He only heard the soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap of milk dripping from Caleb's clothes to the polished floor that he'd wanted to humiliate him. Instead, he'd revealed something about himself, and for the first time in years, Alexander Vale didn't feel powerful. He felt exposed. Upstairs, in his private office, the billionaire poured himself whiskey, neat. His reflection in the glass was fractured, a man he no longer recognized. He replayed the moment over and over, the milkshake falling, the calm eyes staring back. Why didn't the man fight back? Why didn't he break? That question clawed at him more than any guilt could. Downstairs, in the dim kitchen, Caleb stood by the sink, washing his face under cold water. The chill bit into his skin, grounding him. He gripped the edge of the sink and stared at his reflection. Milk streaked across his temple like white scars. The humiliation burned. But not for the reason people would think. It wasn't pride that hurt, it was recognition. He'd seen that same emptiness in the eyes of soldiers who'd lost themselves in war. Alexander Vale wasn't a villain to him anymore. He was a wounded man hiding behind cruelty. And that made the pain worse, because Caleb knew men like that could destroy everything around them before realizing they were the ones bleeding. A busboy entered quietly. "Hey man, you okay?" Caleb exhaled slowly, voice steady. "Yeah, just cleaning up." But he wasn't cleaning milkshake off his skin. He was scrubbing away the reminder of everything he used to be. He dried his face, straightened his shirt, and whispered under his breath, "Don't break, soldier. Not yet." When he walked back out into the empty restaurant, Alexander was gone. But the silence he left behind was heavy, the kind that stays even when the music starts again. Caleb looked around at the other workers. None of them spoke. They just gave him the look of people who'd seen a giant fall and didn't know whether to cheer or run. He went back to work, each motion quiet, controlled. But his thoughts loud and racing that he didn't know it yet. Neither of them did. But that milkshake wasn't just an act of humiliation. It was destiny's trigger. The first spark in a story neither man was ready to live. If you were Caleb, standing there with milk dripping down your face, would you have fought back or walked away in silence? Tell me what you'd do in the comments. The night after the milkshake incident, the vellum looked the same from the outside. Polished glass, glowing chandeliers, laughter spilling out into the street. But inside, the air felt different. Heavy. Watching, word had spread among the staff like wildfire. The billionaire had poured a milkshake on the new guy. Most people expected Caleb to quit. A few even hoped he would. Nobody wanted to be near the next explosion. But he didn't quit. That he came in the next morning. Early, quiet, precise. The kind of man who did his job without flinching. He mopped the same floors, served the same tables, and said nothing. But everyone could feel it. Something about him had changed. When the manager tried to make small talk, Caleb just smiled politely. When a waiter joked about taking one for the team, he didn't respond. He wasn't angry. He was focused. He was watching. From his office upstairs, Alexander watched too. He'd told himself he wouldn't care. He'd told himself it was over. Just another day, another nobody. But every time he saw Caleb move through the restaurant, calm and unreadable, it unsettled him. For years, Alexander had been the man in control, the one who made people shrink. But Caleb hadn't shrunk. He'd stood there, drenched in milk and dignity, and somehow, that moment had turned the mirror on Alexander himself. "Sir?" Marla, his assistant, stood at the doorway. "You have the press conference in 20 minutes. He didn't move. "Do you ever think," he said slowly, "that power only attracts the worst kind of people?" Marla blinked. "Is that a trick question?" He gave a dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe." He turned back to the window, looking down at the floor below, at Caleb clearing tables. Every movement was deliberate, efficient, proud. Even in silence. It bothered him. That kind of peace. Alexander had everything: wealth, control, legacy. But this man, this stranger covered in humility, had something he didn't: freedom. He tore his gaze away. Guilt wasn't something he entertained. Guilt was weakness. And weakness got you destroyed. But as he left his office, the sound of his own footsteps echoed like judgment. Downstairs, Caleb took a deep breath and focused on polishing a glass. His reflection wavered in the crystal, distorted, divided. Just like he felt inside, he wasn't angry at Alexander Vale. Not anymore. He was angry at himself for feeling something unexpected in that moment. Pity that he'd seen cruelty before, in combat zones, in desperate places. But cruelty born from pain? That was different. It was human. It was tragic. And somehow, he couldn't get the billionaire's face out of his mind. "Hey man," said Luis, one of the cooks, sliding him a glass of water. "I don't know how you do it. If that guy poured a milkshake on me, I'd have knocked him out." Caleb smiled faintly. "That's the thing about fighting back, Luis. You only win if you care who's watching." "You saying you don't care?" Caleb looked down at his hands, strong, scarred, steady. "I used to. Not anymore." Luis shook his head. "You're a strange dude." "Maybe," Caleb said softly. but strange is better than broken. He turned away, trying to focus on his tasks. But his mind drifted again, back to Alexander's eyes. There was something there he recognized. Not arrogance, not even hatred, just loneliness. That it was the same look he'd seen in soldiers who came back from war without visible wounds. The kind that bled inward. That afternoon, Alexander's day went from bad to worse. A board member questioned his leadership. His ex-wife called about a son who no longer wanted to speak to him. Every word was an echo of everything he'd lost that BY evening. He was a storm ready to break. He walked into the vellum unannounced, heading straight to his usual table. The staff tensed instantly, like animals sensing a predator. Caleb was wiping the nearby counter, pretending not to notice. Alexander's voice cut through the tension. "You, come here." Caleb turned, calm as ever. "Yes, sir." Alexander studied him, eyes narrow. "Why are you still here?" Caleb tilted his head. "Because it's my job." "You think you're proving something?" "Not to you." That answer landed harder than any insult. Alexander leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You think I feel guilty about what happened?" Caleb's voice didn't rise. "I don't think about what you feel, sir." Alexander chuckled, bitter, hollow. "Then you're smarter than most people who work for me." He turned away, expecting Caleb to leave, but instead, the man just stood there, silent, steady, refusing to vanish. "Anything else?" Caleb asked finally. Alexander hesitated. "No, that'll be all." Caleb gave a small nod and walked away, and somehow, that calm retreat hit harder than any confrontation could have. Alexander sat there long after, his untouched drink sweating on the table. For the first time in years, he didn't feel superior. He felt seen, and that terrified him. That night, Caleb lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling. The sound of the milkshake hitting him replayed in his mind, not because of the humiliation, but because of the silence that followed. He'd seen Alexander's eyes. Under all that cruelty, there'd been a flicker of something almost human. Regret. He turned on his side, sighing. Why can't I just hate him? He didn't have an answer, because maybe hate was easy, and something about Alexander Vale didn't feel easy. It felt tragic that you believe people like Alexander, powerful but broken, can truly change? Or do some scars run too deep? Share your thoughts below. We're just getting started. Rain fell like ash over the city that night, soft but endless, painting the streets in silver reflections. Inside the vellum, the lights dimmed one by one as closing time approached. The restaurant was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after too many words have been left unsaid. Caleb was finishing his shift alone. Most of the staff had already gone home. He moved through the dining room with the precision of a man cleaning not just tables, but thoughts. The smell of lemon polish and faint vanilla still lingered from the day's chaos. He didn't expect to see Alexander Vale walk through the door. The billionaire wasn't in a suit this time. Just a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, collar open. No entourage, no pretense. His face looked older than it had 3 days ago. Tired, drawn, haunted. Caleb froze, mop in hand. "We're closed." Alexander gave a faint, bitter smile. "I own the place." Caleb set the mop aside, nodding once. "Then I guess you can stay as long as you like." He started to walk away, but Alexander's voice stopped him. "Stay." The word wasn't an order. It was quieter, almost a plea. Caleb turned slowly. "What do you need, sir?" Alexander looked around the empty restaurant, the marble, the chandeliers, the spotless glass, and laughed softly. "It's strange. I built all this to feel powerful. Now it just feels like a cage I locked myself in." Caleb said nothing. The rain outside grew louder, drumming softly against the glass. Alexander poured himself a drink from the bar, then hesitated. "You want one?" "No, sir." "Suit yourself." He took a long sip, exhaled. "You ever do something cruel just because you could?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "That's not really my style." Alexander nodded slowly, his eyes drifting toward the polished floor. "No, I suppose not. You've got control. I saw it that day. You didn't even blink." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Years of training. Military." Caleb didn't answer. Alexander studied him. "You don't belong here. You move like a man who's been somewhere no one comes back from." Caleb finally looked at him, eyes steady. "You learn a lot in places like that. Mostly how small men with too much power can destroy lives without even realizing it." Alexander swallowed. The word stung, but he didn't fight back. Is that what you think I am? He asked quietly. Caleb's answer came without hesitation. I don't think. I saw it. The billionaire flinched, not outwardly, but somewhere deep inside. He took another drink and sank into a chair. For the first time in a long time, Alexander Vale didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man collapsing under his own reflection. The lights flickered. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Then, darkness. The power went out. A single emergency light flickered to life near the kitchen, casting the restaurant in soft gold shadows. The city storm had taken down half the grid. Caleb sighed. Looks like we're stuck. Alexander gave a humorless chuckle. Figures. Even my own building traps me when I try to leave. He ran a hand through his hair. There's a backup generator in the cellar. But the door's probably jammed again. I'll check it, Caleb said. No, Alexander said quickly. I'll go with you. For a moment, neither spoke. Then they walked side by side through the dark corridor toward the cellar. Their footsteps echoed, billionaire and janitor, predator and soldier, two men who'd been pretending to be someone else for too long. The air downstairs was damp, metallic. The emergency light flickered weakly, throwing moving shadows across the walls. Alexander cursed softly under his breath as he tugged at the heavy generator switch. It stuck again. Caleb crouched beside him, assessing the mechanism. You're pulling the wrong way. Alexander frowned. Excuse me. Step back. With one firm motion, Caleb adjusted the lever and pulled. The power roared to life instantly. The lights above them buzzed, then glowed steady. Alexander blinked, half annoyed, half impressed. How did you? Caleb wiped his hands on a rag. You'd be surprised what you learn when you don't have people to fix things for you. That landed like a quiet truth between them. As they climbed back upstairs, Alexander spoke softly. You really were in the military, weren't you? Caleb didn't deny it. A long time ago. SEAL? Caleb glanced at him, the faintest flicker of surprise in his eyes. You're observant. Rich men are trained to be, Alexander said. It's how we survive. Caleb stopped walking. No, it's how you avoid dying. There's a difference. Alexander looked at him for a long moment. The silence between them was almost intimate, not in a romantic way yet, but in the way two souls recognize pain in each other. I don't know why you stayed after what I did, Alexander said finally. Most people would have walked out or sued me. Caleb exhaled slowly. Because walking away is easy. Staying takes more strength. Besides, he met the billionaire's eyes. Maybe I wanted to see if there was still something human left in you. Alexander opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't. The words hit too close for a long time. They just stood there. Two men, one trying to understand the other, both trying to outrun themselves. Finally, Alexander whispered, I don't know if there is. Caleb's voice softened. Then maybe you need to find out. Outside, the rain began to slow. The thunder rolled into silence. Inside the vellum, two men stood in the soft hum of restored light, strangers no longer, but something unspoken beginning to take root. Neither of them realized it yet, but the walls around their hearts had already started to crack. Would you have stayed to face the person who humiliated you, or walked away forever? Sometimes the hardest forgiveness is the one that never gets asked for. Share your thoughts below. The next few days passed like smoke, visible, but impossible to hold. Alexander and Caleb began existing in a strange rhythm. No apologies, no explanations. Just the quiet hum of something shifting between them. Caleb still worked his shifts as if nothing had happened, but now, when their eyes met across the room, there was recognition. A fragile, unspoken truce. But peace never lasts long in the heart of two men who've spent their lives pretending not to feel. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened. A sudden kitchen accident, a broken glass, a cut hand, and Caleb rushing to help a young dishwasher who had sliced his palm open. His movements were too fast, too precise. Muscle memory of a man who'd done battlefield first aid before. Hold it, he said, pressing a towel against the boy's hand. You'll be fine. Deep breath. The boy winced. You sound like a doctor. Caleb gave a small smile. Not even close. But Alexander had seen it. He'd been standing by the door, unnoticed, watching. The way Caleb assessed, reacted, controlled the chaos. It wasn't the behavior of an average restaurant worker. It was training, discipline, command. When the chaos settled, Alexander approached him slowly. That wasn't your first time stopping bleeding. Caleb's shoulders stiffened. Some things stay with you. You were military. Alexander pressed. Special ops. Caleb wiped the counter. Does it matter? It does to me. Caleb finally turned, meeting his gaze. Why? You want to put it in a headline? Billionaire humiliates war hero? Go ahead. Alexander didn't speak. For once, he didn't have a comeback. He just looked at him, really looked, and something cracked in his chest. Why would you even work here? He asked softly. You could be doing anything. Caleb hesitated, the calm mask flickering for the first time. Because peace doesn't come from doing something. It comes from not doing what broke you. Alexander frowned. And what broke you? Caleb's eyes darkened, not angry, just distant. The kind of war that doesn't end when you come home. For a moment, the restaurant disappeared. It was just two men, one asking questions he didn't know how to answer, the other revealing truths he'd sworn he'd bury. Caleb walked toward the back door and motioned for Alexander to follow. Outside, the rain had left the city glistening. Reflections of light trembling on wet asphalt. He leaned against the brick wall, his voice low. You ever lose something you can't talk about? Alexander didn't hesitate. My son. Caleb's head snapped up. I'm sorry. Don't be. Alexander said bitterly. He's still alive. He just doesn't want anything to do with me. What happened? Alexander laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Same thing that always happens when you turn power into a religion. You start worshiping it, and forget who you're hurting while you pray. Caleb's jaw tightened. And now you think saying that makes it okay? No, Alexander's voice cracked. But it's a start. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the city filled the silence. Distant traffic, dripping water, a siren fading somewhere far away. Then Caleb spoke quietly. I lost people too. Not in business deals. In sand and blood. My unit went dark on an op that never officially happened. I was the only one who came back. Alexander looked at him, stunned. You survived. Caleb nodded slowly. Sometimes surviving is the cruelest punishment. Their eyes met, two men haunted by different wars, both realizing for the first time that pain was a universal language. Alexander exhaled shakily. I don't think I've said this out loud before, but I'm sorry. For that day, Caleb studied him, searching his face for mockery. There was none, just exhaustion and regret. Sorry doesn't fix it, Caleb said softly. I know, but it's a start. Alexander let out a small, broken laugh. Now you're quoting me. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Guess we're both learning something. For a while, they stood in silence, the night air cool against their skin. Something had shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the walls had begun to crumble. Caleb finally broke the silence. You know, the men in my unit. They used to talk about enemies like you. Enemies. Rich men who never get their hands dirty but send others to do it for them. Alexander winced. Sounds accurate. Maybe, Caleb said. But they also said something else. That sometimes the enemy just needs to remember he's human. Alexander's throat tightened. And you think that's what you're doing here? Reminding me. Caleb's eyes softened. No. I think life did that the moment you threw that milkshake. Alexander's lips parted, ready to respond, to argue, to defend. But instead, he just whispered, maybe you're right. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a billionaire or a sinner or a man hiding from his past. He just felt human. Caleb turned to leave, but Alexander's voice stopped him. Caleb, do you ever think we meet people not by accident, but because we need to? Caleb didn't turn around. I used to believe that. I'm not sure anymore. You should be, Alexander said quietly. Because I think you were sent to remind me who I used to be before I became this. Caleb paused, the words hitting something deep. He didn't respond, just walked away into the night, his figure dissolving into the mist, and Alexander stood there alone, watching him go, knowing something irreversible had happened. For the first time in a long, long time, he didn't feel alone, that he felt seen. Do you think broken men like Alexander and Caleb cross paths by coincidence? Or does life bring wounded souls together for a reason? Days passed, but something had changed, subtly, like a shift in gravity. Alexander started showing up earlier at the vellum, not to inspect or command, but to watch. Sometimes he'd sit quietly at the corner table, laptop open, pretending to work while his eyes followed Caleb as he moved. Calm, deliberate, invisible to everyone except him. for once. The billionaire wasn't looking for mistakes. He was searching for something else: respect, redemption, maybe both. Caleb noticed too. He didn't say anything, but he could feel the weight of Alexander's gaze. It wasn't the stare of a man asserting dominance anymore. It was something gentler, maybe even admiration trying to disguise itself as curiosity. One morning, the rain returned, a soft drizzle that coated the city in silver haze. When Caleb arrived, he found Alexander already there, sleeves rolled up, attempting to fix a broken espresso machine. Caleb blinked. "That's new." Alexander looked up from under the counter, a wrench in hand. "What is you touching something that doesn't cost $1 million?" Alexander smirked faintly. "Figured I'd try it. You know, since you made fixing things look easy." Caleb crossed his arms. "You'll electrocute yourself." "Probably," Alexander said, standing. "Then you'll have to clean up the mess." "You're good at that." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You think that's funny?" "I'm trying humor. It's not my best skill." "You're right," Caleb said, fighting a smirk. "It's not." They both laughed softly, the first genuine laughter between them. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real, and it did something neither expected. It broke the invisible tension. After a few moments, Caleb crouched beside the espresso machine. "You're pulling the wrong wire again." "Story of my life," Alexander muttered. Caleb gave him a look. "Meaning?" "Every time I try to fix something, I end up breaking it worse." "Maybe you've been fixing the wrong things," Caleb said quietly. Alexander froze, his hands still. "You ever get tired of being right?" "All the time." There was a pause. Just the sound of rain tapping softly against the window, the hum of the machine, the faint rhythm of two hearts learning to breathe again. When the espresso finally sputtered to life, Alexander smiled, genuinely this time. "Guess we did it." "We?" Caleb said, half amused. "Well, you fixed it. I supervised." "You mean you got in the way?" Alexander chuckled. "Same thing." Caleb leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You know, I didn't think you had it in you to try. Most men like you don't lift a finger if it doesn't come with applause." Alexander looked down, then back up. "Maybe I'm tired of applause. Maybe I just want quiet." Caleb's expression softened. "Quiet isn't the same as peace." Alexander tilted his head. "And what's peace to you, soldier?" Caleb hesitated. "Peace is when you stop fighting ghosts." Alexander stared at him, really stared. "Then maybe I need someone to teach me how." Caleb met his eyes for a long moment. "Peace isn't taught. It's earned." Their words lingered in the air, heavy but gentle. Later that night, the restaurant closed early due to the storm. Power flickered again, but neither cared. They sat at the corner table, the same one where humiliation had once been served, now shared by two men nursing cups of coffee instead of pride. Alexander leaned back, eyes on the rain outside. "You ever wonder if life just keeps testing us until we finally listen?" Caleb gave a small smile. "If that's true, then you must have failed a lot of tests." "Constantly," Alexander said. "Maybe that's why you're here." Caleb frowned. "To test you?" "No. To remind me that people don't stay down forever." Caleb looked away, his voice quiet. "I didn't come here for you." "I know," Alexander said. "But maybe you came here for something that only looks like me." That silence between them was different now, not tension, but comfort. The kind of silence where two broken people stop needing to fill the void with words. Caleb's phone buzzed on the table. A message from an old contact. "VA wants to confirm your discharge details. Contact ASAP." Alexander glanced at the screen. "You're still in touch with them?" "Sometimes," Caleb said. "Mostly for the families of men who didn't come home." Alexander nodded slowly. "You do that quietly, don't you? No one would ever know." "It's not for people to know," Caleb said. "It's for them." Alexander looked at him with something like awe. "You could have told me that the first day we met. You could have used it to make me look small." Caleb's eyes softened. "I didn't need to. You already looked small enough under all that armor." Alexander exhaled slowly, the truth of it cutting deep but healing at the same time. "You're not afraid to say it. Someone should." He smiled faintly. "You're infuriating." Caleb's lips curved. "So I've been told." Their laughter faded into quiet again, and for the first time, Alexander didn't feel like the richest man in the room. He felt like a man finally learning how to feel. As the rain softened outside, Caleb stood. "Get some rest, Mr. Vale." "Alexander," he said gently. Caleb paused. "What?" "My name." If you're going to keep reminding me who I am, you might as well use it. Caleb nodded once. Good night, Alexander. And with that, he left, but something stayed behind. The warmth of his words, the echo of his steady voice, the reminder that maybe, just maybe, forgiveness wasn't impossible. For the first time in years, Alexander didn't feel haunted. He felt hopeful that you believe forgiveness begins the moment we start seeing someone's pain instead of their pride. Let me know in the comments. This story's heart is just beginning to heal. For the first time in months, the vellum felt alive again. Business was booming, the staff lighter, the atmosphere warmer. Even the customers noticed. Something's different, one woman told her husband as they dined. It feels human. The change had a name, too. Actually, Caleb and Alexander. Since that night of rain and quiet confession, they'd found a strange rhythm. Alexander had begun doing what no one thought possible, listening. He took feedback. He smiled more. Sometimes, he even helped in the kitchen just to make Caleb roll his eyes. He'd never say it aloud. But Caleb had become the compass he didn't know he needed. But even the most peaceful waters hide storms beneath. That it was late afternoon when the first crack appeared. A journalist had been digging into Alexander's past, his ruthless acquisitions, the bankruptcies he'd caused, the trail of lives he'd wrecked to build his empire. It was an open secret in the business world, but this article went further. It mentioned the vellum, and worse, it mentioned Caleb. Sources say a former Navy SEAL now works under Vale's employment, reportedly as part of a PR attempt to humanize his image. Alexander stared at the words in disbelief. PR attempt? He hadn't leaked that. He'd never even spoken publicly about Caleb. But in the court of public opinion, truth was irrelevant. Headlines ruled everything. Marla stormed into his office, waving the printed article. Alexander, this is a disaster. They're spinning him as your redemption trophy. The board's furious. They want you to distance yourself immediately. He looked at her, face unreadable. Distance myself? Fire him. Make a statement. Say it was all a misunderstanding. The words hung there. Poisonous. He didn't respond. But deep down, something cold began to coil in his chest. The same darkness that once ruled him. That evening, Caleb arrived to work as usual. He noticed the strange looks, the whispers, the sudden hush whenever he entered a room. Then Louise handed him a copy of the paper. You see this, man? Caleb froze as he read the headline. His name, his past, his service record, all out in the open. And at the center of it all, Alexander Vale, his jaw clenched. Who gave them this? Louise shrugged. Says it came from someone inside the company. Caleb didn't need to guess. When he entered Alexander's office, the billionaire was already standing by the window, his reflection fractured by the city lights. You read it? Alexander asked quietly. Yeah, Caleb said, voice low. You want to tell me why the world suddenly thinks I'm your redemption project? Alexander turned, eyes tired. I didn't leak that, Caleb. Then who did? I don't know. Don't lie to me. I'm not. Caleb's fists tightened. You think this helps me? You think I wanted people to know? I came here to disappear, not to become your charity headline. Alexander's voice rose. I didn't ask for any of this either. You think I wanted my life dissected again? No, Caleb said sharply. You just wanted control, same as always. Alexander flinched, anger flaring. Don't act like you know me. I do, Caleb snapped. I've seen men like you all my life. You hide behind money because you're afraid of being ordinary. The words hit deep, too deep. Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper. And you hide behind discipline because you're afraid of being human. Silence. The air thickened, heavy and hot. Caleb stepped forward, eyes cold. You want to talk about fear? I watched brothers die for each other. I buried men who'd give anything for one more day of peace. And you pour milkshakes on people because you can't face your own reflection. Alexander's hand slammed against the desk. I said I was sorry. Then act like it. I've been trying. He shouted. Every damn day since that moment. Caleb's breathing was heavy, his eyes dark with something between fury and heartbreak. Then maybe trying isn't enough. The words broke something in both of them. Alexander turned away, his voice quieter now, trembling at the edges. You were right about one thing, Caleb. Peace isn't taught. It's earned. And maybe I just don't deserve it. Caleb stared at him. The billionaire who suddenly looked so small. So human. Maybe you don't, Caleb said softly. But you could have. Then he walked out. Alexander didn't stop him. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. The door closed with a sound that echoed like finality. Outside, Caleb didn't look back. His footsteps were steady, but his chest burned. He told himself he was done. That he didn't care. That the man upstairs was just another lost soul who'd have to save himself. But as he reached the street and felt the night wind hit his face, his heart betrayed him, because for the first time since the war, he cared. And caring, after everything he'd survived, hurt worse than any wound. That night, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at the empty chair across from him. The silence was unbearable. He reached for the phone to call Caleb, then stopped it. He didn't know what to say. How do you apologize to someone you've already broken twice? He set the phone down, whispering to the darkness, "You were right. I'm still afraid." Outside, lightning flared across the skyline, bright, violent, unforgiving. The storm had returned, but this time, it wasn't just outside. It was in both their hearts. Do you think words like, "I'm sorry," mean anything when trust is already broken? Or does love, in any form, deserve a second chance? The next morning, the city felt muted. The kind of silence that comes after a storm. Not peace, but aftermath. Caleb hadn't gone back to the Vellum. He couldn't. The restaurant had become a battlefield now. A place filled with ghosts, not guests. He sat in his small apartment, hands clasped, eyes lost in the space between thoughts. The newspaper lay crumpled on the table beside him. His own face stared back. War hero turned waiter. He didn't recognize the man in the photo. He wasn't a hero anymore. He was just a man who'd let his guard down and paid the price. The phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again and again. Finally, he answered. "Caleb? It's Luis. Hey, boss hasn't been in for 2 days. He canceled all reservations. Place is dark. You know what's going on." Caleb sighed. "He's probably doing damage control." Luis hesitated. "Nah, man. I think something's wrong." Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've seen that guy angry, arrogant, everything. But this? He's gone quiet. Like he's done fighting." Caleb said nothing. Luis continued, voice softer. "Look, I don't know what went down between you two. But if there's one thing I've learned about Alexander Vale, when he stops yelling, that's when he's really breaking." The line went silent. Then Caleb whispered, "Thanks, Luis." He hung up and sat still for a long moment. Then he stood. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his penthouse, the skyline sprawling out before him, glittering, cold, indifferent. He hadn't been to work. He hadn't spoken to anyone. His world, the one built on ego and steel, felt suddenly small, fragile, meaningless. That he'd spent his life mastering deals, crushing competition, shaping power. But the one thing he couldn't conquer was the silence left behind by someone who'd seen through him. He poured himself a drink, then stopped halfway. He stared at it for a long time before setting it down. For the first time in years, he didn't want to numb the pain. He wanted to feel it, because feeling meant there was still something alive inside him. He walked to his desk and opened an old drawer. Inside lay a photo of his son, smiling, maybe 8 years old. That was the last year they'd spoken without anger. He whispered, "I ruined everything trying to be untouchable." Then, almost without realizing it, he reached for his phone and typed a message. To Caleb, if I could take it back, I would. Not just the milkshake, all of it. You were right about me. I don't know how to be human anymore, but I want to learn. He stared at the words, thumb hovering over send. Then he deleted the message. Pride, that old poison, crept back in. He wouldn't care, he muttered. He's done with me. He set the phone down and turned back toward the window. The city lights blurred behind the glass, not from rain this time, but from tears he hadn't let fall in years. Across the city, Caleb was walking, fast, determined, soaked in a drizzle that had returned just enough to sting. He didn't know what he'd say when he saw Alexander. He just knew he couldn't let the story end here. He reached the Vellum and found it dark, just as Luis had said. The front doors were locked, but a faint light glowed from inside. He used his spare staff key and stepped in. The smell of coffee, rain, and old memory filled the air. Alexander was sitting at the bar, drink untouched, shoulders heavy, eyes distant. Caleb spoke softly. "You look like hell." Alexander turned, startled. "You shouldn't be here." "I could say the same." Alexander laughed weakly. "You came to finish the job? Tell me I deserve this." Caleb walked closer. "No. I came to see if you're still fighting." Alexander looked up, eyes glassy. What's the point? The point is that you're still breathing. That means you're not done yet. Alexander shook his head. I hurt you. I dragged you into my mess. You were right. I destroy everything I touch. Caleb's tone softened. You destroy what you refuse to face. But you're facing it now, aren't you? Alexander looked at him, voice trembling. I don't know how to be anything else. Caleb stepped closer, his voice calm. Then stop trying to be something. Just be. Alexander swallowed hard. You make it sound easy. It's not, Caleb said. But it's worth it. Silence. Then Alexander asked, almost a whisper, do you hate me? Caleb thought for a long moment. I did. The day you poured that milkshake on me, I saw everything I hated about the world in your eyes. But then, I saw something else. What? Caleb's voice softened. Someone who wanted to be better, but didn't know how. Alexander's throat tightened. You give me too much credit. No, Caleb said. You gave up too much of yourself. The billionaire's eyes glistened. You really think a man like me can change? Caleb nodded slowly. I don't think. I know. Because I've seen worse men find peace, and I've seen better men lose it. For the first time, Alexander didn't argue, didn't defend. He just listened. Then Caleb did something that stunned him. He placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder, firm, grounding, real. You're not done, Alexander. Not yet. The touch, simple, human, shattered the last wall between them. Alexander exhaled shakily, voice cracking. Why do you care? Caleb looked at him with quiet compassion. Because somebody once cared enough to pull me out of the dark. I'm just returning the favor. Alexander closed his eyes. The tears finally fell. And in that moment, two men, broken in different ways, found the courage to stop running. That if someone who hurt you admitted they were lost, would you forgive them or walk away? Let's talk in the comments. Morning light spilled through the restaurant windows, warm and golden. Like forgiveness had finally found its way through the glass. It had been a week since that night. The night two broken men chose to stop running from their pain. The vellum reopened quietly. No press, no grand announcement. Just a few regulars and the comforting smell of coffee. Alexander stood behind the counter. Sleeves rolled, tie gone, an apron tied, awkwardly, around his waist. Caleb walked in. And for the first time, there was no tension between them. Just two men, standing where their story began. Each changed in ways the world couldn't see but would feel forever. Alexander looked up and smiled faintly. You're late. Caleb smirked. You're bossy. Old habits, Alexander said. I'm working on it. Caleb chuckled. I can tell. You look like you're about to burn that coffee. Alexander feigned offense. I'll have you know, this is premium veal roast. Yeah, and it smells like regret. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that only comes after war. The staff moved around them quietly, smiling. Everyone could feel it, the shift. The billionaire wasn't barking orders anymore. He was listening, helping, even smiling. That he wasn't the same man who'd poured milkshake on a stranger to feel powerful. He was a man learning to be whole again. Later that afternoon, when the rush faded, Caleb found Alexander outside, sitting on the patio steps, watching the world go by. The city was alive, but he seemed content to just breathe in its noise. Thought you'd left, Caleb said. Thought about it, Alexander replied. But I realized something. Running is easy. Staying, that's hard. Caleb nodded. You're learning. Alexander turned to him. You know, I used to think money fixed everything. Now I realize it only buys silence, not peace. Peace costs truth, Caleb said. Alexander smiled. And truth is expensive. Only if you're afraid of it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Alexander spoke again, his tone more serious. There's something I want to do. He stood, walked back inside, and disappeared into the kitchen. When he returned, he was holding a glass, not with wine or whiskey, but a milkshake, vanilla. Simple. Ordinary. Caleb's brow furrowed. You're kidding. Alexander smiled gently. Not this time. He set the milkshake on the counter between them. When I did that before, I thought it made me strong. Like reminding the world who I was in charge of. But now, his voice trembled. Now I know I was just trying to hide how weak I really felt. Caleb said nothing. He didn't need to. Alexander continued, voice steady but raw. This time, I want to do it right. He picked up the glass, took a breath, and held it out. To the man who taught me what strength really looks like. Caleb stared at it for a moment, then took the glass, his eyes soft but unreadable. Strength isn't about winning, Alexander. It's about not giving up, even when you've lost. Alexander nodded. Then I guess I'm finally strong. Caleb smiled. A small, knowing smile that said everything words couldn't. They clinked the glass gently, and Alexander laughed. You know, it's weird. Feels lighter this time. Yeah, Caleb said. That's what happens when it's not full of pride. As the day faded into evening, the restaurant filled again, not just with customers, but with warmth. Laughter echoed through the air. Music hummed softly, and for the first time, the Vellum didn't feel like Alexander's empire. It felt like home, but he and Caleb worked side by side until closing, clearing tables, wiping counters, making jokes only they understood. When they stepped outside under the city lights, the world felt quiet again, not empty, but peaceful. Caleb glanced at him. You did good today. Alexander smiled faintly. We did good. Caleb tilted his head. You ever think about what's next? Maybe for the first time. I'm not trying to plan it, Alexander said. I just want to live it. Caleb chuckled. That's progress. Alexander looked at him, his tone sincere. I meant what I said the other night. I don't know how to be human yet, but I'd like to keep trying, if you'll still have me around. Caleb looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then stop trying, he said softly. Just be one. Alexander smiled. You make it sound so simple. Caleb turned toward the street, hands in his pockets. Simple doesn't mean easy, but it's worth it. They stood there, two men who had started as enemies, strangers, symbols of everything broken, now simply people, not perfect, not fixed, but real. And in the quiet hum of the city, that was enough. Later that week, a news piece ran again, not about scandal or shame, but about transformation. Alexander Vale, the once infamous billionaire, has pledged half his company's profits to fund veteran rehabilitation programs across the state, an initiative inspired by one of his own staff. No names, no fame, just change. Caleb read the article at home, smiled faintly, and whispered, Guess he passed the test after all. He looked up at the photo on his wall, his old unit, smiling, alive. He saluted softly. Mission accomplished. The next morning, the Vellum's doors opened again. A couple walked in and smiled as Alexander greeted them with warmth and humility. Caleb worked the counter, content, grounded, and as Alexander passed by, he placed a quiet hand on Caleb's shoulder, not to command, but to thank. The story that began with humiliation had become a story of redemption. Two men, once defined by pride and pain, had found peace, not in forgetting the past, but in forgiving it. Thank you so much for watching this video till the end. If you enjoyed this one, you will surely enjoy the next one. So click on the image on your screen right now to watch the next story. And don't forget to subscribe.